All right. Welcome, everyone. I, Councilmember Joe, call the September 16th, 2025 City Council Mobility and Infrastructure Committee to order. And the first item on the agenda is public comment. There are multiple opportunities for comment that can come before this committee. And there's a general comment period at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after each presentation and the council question and answer period on tonight's agenda. So members of the public may address the council at this time in person or virtually. And so we'll check to see if anyone in person in the chamber would like to make comment to the committee. Not seeing anyone. I'll check to see if there's anyone online that might want to make comment before tonight's meeting's agenda starts.
No, there's no one online.
Okay. No public comment this evening, but please keep in mind if you're watching this video later, you should always feel free to reach out to City Council at council@issaquah.wa.gov. All the emails are read, and comments certainly are welcome from the public on any of the items that might come before this committee or the City Council in general. With that, we'll go on to item number 3, the approval of minutes. Is there any objection to approving the minutes or any changes for the July 15th, 2025 minutes that you would like to suggest?
No changes.
Very well. Those minutes will then be adopted. That takes us to the 4A. The agenda item is COM 0120 Utility Rate Study Review draft study here. And we have Director of Public Works Emily Moon with us tonight, and it looks like you have Matt Ellis and our FCS Consulting Group person, Sergey Tarasov. So I'll hand it over to Matt.
Good evening, council members. We're getting the rate study up here.
I should be sharing my screen. Can you see it okay, Matt?
We can see it, yep.
Great.
All right, well, we are back again tonight to present a summary of the findings and policy recommendations for the utility rate study. Go to the next slide. So the purpose, we will provide a very brief summary of the policies and rate objectives we discussed with you over the past few months, with the intention of bringing this before the entire council next month for the adoption. Next slide. The utility rate study goal, as we've stated before, our goal is to develop new equitable rates for the city water, sewer, and stormwater services that will cover our costs for planned capital projects and continued day-to-day operations of our infrastructure. The study will set rates for the next 5 years with a look ahead for longer-term policy goals and project forecasting. Next slide. As we look at bringing the entire study to the full council, we want to reiterate the core objectives that we set out for the rate study way back in March when we began this endeavor. Namely, we want our rates to be predictable, smooth, and uniform, establish a defensible basis for assigning cost shares and providing equity for ratepayers, cover the full cost of providing utility services now and in the future, provide sufficient operating reserves to protect the solvency of our funds, and afford the investment in capital infrastructure to ensure current and future customers pay their share of the system's costs. Next slide. So here we are. We set our revenue requirements, our cost of service for each utility, identified general facility charges, and evaluated our rate design. Tonight, we are going to provide a very brief summary of the policy discussions we made to date, as well as show the changes in utility rates from present to future, and ensure the committee is ready to send the entire package to council for rate adoption on October 20th. Next slide. So, with that, our direction needed tonight is we'll be asking the committee if you are ready to forward the rate study to City Council for consideration and to recommend adoption. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sergey.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, committee members, for taking the time this afternoon to continue our discussion regarding the utility rate study for the water, sewer, and stormwater utilities. As Matt mentioned, my name is Sergey Tarasov with FCS. Now, we'll do a quick overview of the presentation and dive right in. We're going to talk about the overall rate setting process. It's been a couple of months since we met, and I always like to reiterate just the steps that go into these type of analyses. We'll talk about the background, just a quick refresher of our prior meetings, and dive into the summary of the prior discussions regarding policy and the guidance that we have received. We'll also briefly look at the results, but all the information that we'll be discussing today has been reviewed numerous times with the committee and staff internally, and is just being aggregated all together for your one additional review, just to make sure that you're comfortable with the guidance to move forward with the full council. So just as a reminder, a typical study such as this one consists of 3 key analytical steps, starting with the overall revenue requirement, which defines the needs for each utility on a standalone basis. Here we're taking a look at our expenses and revenues at current levels, making sure that we can meet our obligations, and if not, what do we need to do about it, making sure that each utility is self-sufficient, there's no cross-utility subsidization that's occurring. Step number 2 is referred to as a cost of service, and dives a little bit deeper and looks at inter-class cost allocation, trying to answer the question if there are differences between classes. So if you think of step 1 as identifying the size of the cost, the size of the pie of cost that we need to cover, step 2 slices that pie into pieces to look at how big the slice should be for each class. And lastly, step number 3, rate design, looks at developing the actual fixed and variable charges that are assessed to our classes and our customers individually. Now, as a quick background, the last study completed for the utilities, for the city's utilities, was in 2020. At that time, revenues were not sufficient to keep up with obligations, and the study developed a multi-year rate strategy for each utility, which is summarized in the table in the middle of the graphic. The highlighted green years are the years that have been adopted and implemented, and the study also forecasted beyond that 4-year period to see if there will be a need for additional adjustments. Before implementing any extra rates, 2026 and beyond, the city wanted to revisit it, and that's why we're here this year discussing that updated rate study, which started in 2024. Now, since we started the study, we've been working with your staff, going over the details, developing the analysis, and started the outreach and communication process with the committee of the whole earlier this year in March, and then continued our discussion with the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee, meeting to follow up on revenue requirements, talking about cost of service, discussing the one-time fees imposed on new development or redevelopment through general facility charges, and then last discussion we had was in July to talk about rate design. Now, the major policy guidance that we were looking for from the committee and received from the committee will be summarized in the next couple of slides, and we'll again break it down by the steps of the rate study. Starting with the revenue requirement, again, we did confirm that the projections from the prior study were present. Rates at current levels in 2025 dollars were not sufficient to keep up with the inflationary cost pressures on operating costs, as well as the capital plans identified in the planning process through water system planning and general sewer planning. In order to resolve those deficiencies, we came up with multiple approaches, and we looked for guidance from the committee, focusing on the way that we're financing our capital plan. So the first major question and guidance we received was, how do we pay for our capital? Do we utilize cash-only financing? Do we maximize debt financing? Or look at a hybrid approach? And based on a bit of discussion that we had with the committee of the whole and the follow-up discussion, the direction we received was that we should try to minimize debt, especially in the short term, as much as possible. But if we have to utilize some debt in the longer term to keep our rates as affordable as possible, that was sufficient as well. So our main guidance was to keep the debt borrowing to a minimum if possible. The second question that we had to council was regarding multi-year rate setting. Well, the rate strategy that we'll be discussing and the rate plan will be a 5-year rate plan. The capital needs that the utilities are facing, developed through the comprehensive planning efforts, do go beyond that 5-year strategy. So the big question was, do we set our rates for just our short-term needs, or do we make sure that we can cover our obligations not just today but into the future? So a good example would be the water treatment plant project spans beyond the 5-year plan, and we need to do we set our rates to make sure that we can cover those obligations for the treatment plant and other similar projects, or do we only focus on our short term? And the committee really wanted to make sure that we can cover our obligations today and tomorrow as well. Lastly, the big question was on the level of the adjustment for all of our rates, and the major guidance that we received from committee of the whole was that to make sure that any rate strategy we bring back tries to keep it under 6% for the local share of our charges, which means for all the rates not inclusive of King County charges for sewer treatment, because we're not in charge of those rates. Those are just simply passed through. So the non-King County rates should be on a combined basis at or below 6%. Moving on to cost of service, we did find that there are interclass differences based on the evaluation and the cost of service analysis performed for the water and sewer utilities, and had a good discussion with the committee throughout our meetings. The big question that we needed guidance on is, what do we do about these findings? Do we pause and do nothing and revisit it during the next rate study? Do we move forward with addressing the findings and try to move our classes towards cost of service? And if so, how quickly do we get there? Do we do it all at once, potentially causing some major adjustments to a few classes, or do we make adjustments gradually and smoothly and trying to impact customers as little as possible above the already average proposed increases? The committee preferred the gradual phase-in approach and definitely preferred moving to cost of service based rate setting. And then lastly, when we talk about the rate study itself, was rate design. There are two major items that we focused in this time around. When we reviewed the classes of service, we wanted to simplify our rate schedules. In reviewing the duplex and single family design requirements for the water system, we did see that they're fairly similar in types of customers. So we proposed condensing the rate schedule for by moving duplex accounts into the single family rate structure. The committee was fine with that recommendation. And the second rate design adjustment that we proposed was the recalibration of the minimum use assumptions for the sewer King County portion rates for non-single family customers. So currently, King County assesses the city rate per residential customer equivalent for single family customers, and based on volume tied to residential customer equivalents. They define an RCE, or residential customer equivalents, as 1,500 cubic feet bi-monthly, which was slightly higher than the current figure used in the minimum fee for the city's current rates. So we proposed recalibrating to tie the minimum charges to align with their definition of an RCE. Again, the committee was comfortable with that recommendation. And then the last policy guidance that we talked about was focused around a slightly different concept. Previously, we were talking about bi-monthly rates, which are ongoing to existing customers. Then we switched gears and talked about general facility charges, which are one-time fees imposed on development for connecting to the city's utilities. And when we calculated the charges to the cost-based levels, the question we had to the committee: do we set the rates at the calculated levels? Do we defer any adjustments at this time and revisit in the future, keeping the rates at current levels, which would put pressure onto existing customers for the recovery of those project costs? Do we phase in gradually towards cost-based levels over multiple years? And then lastly, historically, the city has had a practice of adjusting these fees between these interim updates with inflation, because these charges are typically calculated in today's dollars, and as cost of infrastructure increases, you're allowed to adjust the fees to account for that inflation. So the direction we received from the committee based on these charges was to set the sewer and the storm charges to the cost-based levels, and gradually phase in the water adjustments over time, because they were a little bit higher than the other utilities from an increase perspective. Regarding the annual inflation, the committee was comfortable keeping the current practice of adjusting inflation annually. So now let's take a quick look at the actual findings numbers. I'm going to be going pretty quickly here because these numbers have been shown and shared with the committee several times, but if at any point you want to revisit them, just do pause me and let me know if you have any questions. First, we're going to take a look at a table for the revenue requirement. Here we're showing that the system-wide increases by utility, and those increases impacting an average single-family residential bill, focusing on the city share of charges only. So this does not include the King County portion. With this in mind, the average increase for a typical residential home would be a little under 5%, which falls in well below the 6% threshold that was discussed with the committee of the whole. In addition, the scenario would avoid borrowing any new debt proceeds in the short term, but did project additional debt borrowing outside of the 5-year period. So again, balancing that current short-term debt mitigation while still trying to keep rates affordable long-term by utilizing a combination of debt, borrowing, and cash. On the cost of service front, here what we're looking at is the water and sewer summary. The total row for each table summarizes system-wide increase for each utility, and you'll notice that each individual class is slightly above that average increase or slightly below for both sewer and water classes of service. If a class percentage specifically is a little bit above that system-wide average, it indicates that the class was not paying their allocated share costs and needed to go up more than average. If a class-specific increase is slightly below that average, it indicated that the class was paying a little bit more than their allocated share cost and needed to go up slightly less than average. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Instead of performing a one-time adjustment that could have been large and double-digit to a specific class, we're gradually and slowly moving our individual classes towards cost of service, trying to stay as close to that system-wide average for everybody as possible while still making progress. Next, we'll take a look at the last step, the rate design, the actual proposed rate schedules. Again, not without focusing too much on the numbers, because there's quite a few. I do apologize for that. This is the rate proposed schedule for the single family and the duplex rate schedules. The main thing to notice here is that currently the single family and duplex rates are slightly different, both on the fixed charges, which are represented in the upper table, and they do have a slightly varying volumetric rate represented in the bottom table. The blocks are slightly different, and the rates within those blocks are different. All we're trying to propose is to move the duplex into the single family structure with this change starting in 2026. Moving on to non-residential classes, here we currently have the same fixed charge for all non-single family type of accounts, which includes apartments, commercial classes, public authority, and large user accounts. We're keeping that concept the same. Everybody will still maintain the same fixed charge on a bi-monthly basis. The volumetric rates will be slightly adjusted differently to align with the cost of service phase-in that we talked about a couple of slides ago. Overall, not a significant change from a system-wide adjustment, just keeping the same rates for the fixed portion and slight moderate adjustments to each individual subclass of the non-residential categories. For the irrigation classes, here we're summarizing both parks and right-of-way irrigation as well as private irrigation. Again, similar concept here. The monthly fixed charges will remain the same for both, and the volumetric rates will start to converge gradually over many years. So this is a very gradual transition, moving the classes towards a similar rate as identified in the cost of service analysis. Moving on to the sewer utility, here we're summarizing the local share, the city share of charges. We currently have a fixed charge that's the same no matter what class of service we have, and a volumetric charge which is also the same no matter what class we have. Based on the cost of service results, there needs to be a differential between classes. Now we're keeping the fixed charge the same for all classes, but the differential is starting to materialize through the volumetric rate. So you'll notice the single family and duplex rates will stay together because we're merging those classes into one, and the multifamily and non-residential classes will start to deviate in 2026 and beyond, trying to align and address the cost of service findings. Looking at the combined rate for the city and the King County portions of the sewer rate, the upper table shows us the fixed charges. You will notice that the single family rate consists of both the local share and the fixed charge for the King County treatment portion, because it is assessed by King County to us on a fixed charge basis. So you can see that it's represented as a much higher rate than only the local share for all other classes. Starting in 26, you'll notice duplex will align exactly to the single family rate, while the multifamily and non-residential will still continue to only have that local share. For the volumetric rate, the single family rate only has the local share, while the duplex and non-single family have a built-in volumetric King County portion as well. That concept again goes to merging duplex with single family starting in 26, and then keeping that same concept for the volumetric rates starting in 26 and thereafter. You will notice the minimum charges that are assessed to our non-single family customers will go up slightly. That is because we are rebalancing that minimum fee to align with the King County definition of RCE. So instead of being about 12.2, which it currently is, we are moving to the RCE definition for the minimum bill of 1,500 cubic feet or 15 CCF bi-monthly. Then lastly, we have our stormwater rates. These are assessed on an equivalent service unit basis. There is a lower rate for undeveloped parcels, but everybody's treated equally. It's just a charge per ESU, so there's no structural changes recommended. The increases are simply applied across the board to the per ESU rate. So with that, that brings the end of the bi-monthly fee discussion. Here, we also brought back the survey that was presented in the past. We're showing both the existing combined total rates, which does include the King County portion of rates, to our neighboring utilities, and we're also including the proposed strategy, which moves us from the bottom 25th percentile or so of the comparative to closer to the middle. Now, I always caution that this is a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison because we're comparing our rates today to the proposed rates for tomorrow with everybody's rates today. And we know for a fact that many of these communities are going through similar type of studies and will have similar types of adjustments proposed for their 2026 year as well. In addition, every system's different, every system's topography is different, demographics are different, so it's just not a perfect apples and apples comparison, but that question does get asked. And before we wrap things up, we do want to address the general facility charges. So on this slide, these fees are summarized for the sewer and stormwater rates. As we talked about on the policy side, the sewer and stormwater rates are proposed to increase to the cost-based calculated charges per equivalent capacity metric. For the sewer utility, it's per residential customer equivalents. For stormwater, it's per equivalent service unit. For the water utility, because the increase was a little bit higher, if we were to go to that charge all at once, we developed a multi-year phase-in that gradually transitions these fees towards their calculated class-specific level. So it's a 10-year phase-in. In addition to the charges that you're seeing here, inflation will be adjusted based on an accredited construction cost inflation index, which typically is referenced as the engineering news record construction cost inflation index. Since we don't know what the inflation will be and it has to be tied to actual inflation, the adjustments will have to occur once the indices are published on an annual basis. So with that brings to the end my portion of the presentation, and I'll hand it back over to Matt.
All right, thank you, Sergey. So as Sergey mentioned, we went into detail on these policy assumptions regarding our study. We set policy to incur no debt for any of the 3 utilities through 2030. Rates take into account longer-term capital project needs, such as a water treatment plant that has cost phases and implementation beyond 2030. Through committee discussions, we made the stipulation that the combined rate increase for all 3 utilities will be maintained at or below 6% per year for local charges, and any cost of service adjustment will be gradually phased in over a 10-year period. And then into a little more specifics, we decided to move the private and parks right-of-way irrigation customer classes to be more aligned, and that's over a 10-year period. Duplex rates will be aligned with single-family rates instead of commercial as they currently are. The minimum volume assumption for sewer charges will be recalibrated to align with King County residential customer equivalent, which is the RCE, and currently that's at 12% or 12 CCF, and it's going to 15 CCF, so it's a minor calculation change that just helps us a little tiny bit. Sewer and storm general facility charges will be set at the updated cost-based levels, and water will be gradually phased in over the 10-year period. And the city will continue to adjust GFCs for inflation. So those are all the policy assumptions that we made to date. And our recommendation is to forward the study to the City Council for consideration and recommend adoption. And next slide. So the next steps is our, to bring the utility rate study to the city council during the regular meeting on October 20th for adoption. And at that meeting, we'll also codify the rates for January 1st, 2026 implementation. With that, do you have any questions?
Matt, Sergey, thank you. I'll look to my co-patriot up here, see if you have any questions first. No questions? No questions. Okay. All right, I have a couple questions about the GFC. When we are asking someone to come in and hook up to the system, can you give me generally what the GFC entails? Does it entail new projects that we hope to build, or projects that we already are building or will build? I guess kind of the question, the breakdown there.
Sergey, can you recall when we did the general facility charge calculation, what went into that? There was a lot of numbers that we put in.
So yeah, just as a quick background and a quick refresher from our discussion of GFCs. GFCs can be broken down into two cost components. There's two kind of different purposes for the GFCs. The first cost component we typically refer to as the existing cost basis, and it intends to reimburse the existing customers for their investment in the infrastructure today that has extra capacity on the system to allow the future customers to connect. So you have built a system that can serve more than just yourselves, whoever is connected to the system. You have extra capacity that's there and available for growth to occur, and that growth, as they come in, they need to pay for that proportional share of the assets that are already built. Now, in addition to those assets that are already built, there's a second cost component, which we refer to as the future cost basis. And the intent of the future cost basis is to resolve deficiencies. Our system has deficiencies on, as an example, storage requirements, maybe pump station requirements, or our T&D system may have certain deficiencies, and our capital plans have projects included in them that address those deficiencies. So the future cost basis includes only the capacity enhancing share of costs that is there necessary to allow additional future customers to connect. So it's a two cost component charge. The first intent is to reimburse for assets that are in the ground already. The second intent is to pay for deficiencies in the system that are limiting growth from actually coming on.
Sergey, thank you for that. You did mention that the GFCs are intended to make sure that our current ratepayers are not subsidizing or paying for the new growth that's coming in. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes, so the projects that are included in the cost basis for GFC need to be constructed and built and need to be taken into consideration as part of the bi-monthly rates as well. So if we're not adjusting the GFC to account for the fact that it includes certain specific capacity enhancing projects, those projects will still have to be built. So your ratepayers will be paying and carrying a bigger share of the burden of building those projects instead of contributing slightly more proportionally from the new customers connecting to the system. So if a project's included in the GFC and it's set to the cost-based level, a portion of each connection will be contributing for eventual construction of that project and payment of the capacity portion of that project. If we don't adjust the GFC to that level, the rates have to make up the difference, whatever the shortfall is.
Thank you. And just to refresh everyone's memory that might be watching, when we're saying that we're changing our GFCs to an updated cost-based formula, could you go through that again so that we are clear on that?
Sure. Whenever you calculate charges, you include a specific list of projects as well as updated list of infrastructure. Now, in smaller updates on an annual basis, when you don't have a new comprehensive plan, as an example, the project list is not going to change substantially. And once you've updated the charge, you can adjust it with inflation, especially since it's calculated in today's dollars. Now, every 6 to 10 years, the city goes through a comprehensive planning effort, looking at the system deficiencies. Are there any additional regulatory requirements that are necessary? Are there new annexations on the cities within the city that need to be addressed? And the new comprehensive plan is developed with new list of projects. So it's not necessarily an update of a basis. It's just simply making sure that the charge is representative of the projects that are on the list and making sure that the assets that have been built have been included in the charge.
Great, thank you very much. That concludes the questions that I might have. Have you thought of anything new? All right. At this time, we'll open it up to public comment for anyone that might have heard the presentation and might want to comment at this time. Looking in the room, there is no one in the room right now. I'll look to the clerk to see if anyone online would like to give public comment on the presentation.
Chair, we do have a virtual attendee. I do not see a raised hand at this time, though.
Okay. Thank you very much. Discussion then. Barbara, Michelle, do you want to give any comments? Thank you.
Right, I think the, excuse me, I think the question is, are we ready to send this off to the full council? And my answer is yes. Just want to thank the staff for absolutely thorough discussion and over time and helping us understand all the complexities that are involved in setting the rates. So we did receive a comment today, later this afternoon. I believe Andrea got a copy of that, and I think it came in late. I did not get a chance to actually think about it or read it very thoroughly. Maybe we can pass that on to the council along with the recommendation for adoption so that they can consider that in more detail. But personally, I think that the staff has made an excellent case that we are needing to thoroughly support our utilities, and that is going to unfortunately involve a rate increase. But I think we've done everything we can to mitigate that, to spread it out over time, to contain it within the 6%, and to be considerate about the affordability, as living in Issaquah is often unaffordable for a lot of people. So we're doing the best that we can to mitigate this increase, but we also have to be fiscally responsible and ensure that utilities continue in a economically viable way. So yes, I am ready to send this on to the council. I think staff has done a magnificent job of presenting all of the information and the complexity to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Council President DeMichelle. I too am ready to send this on to council for full discussion October 20th. I want to thank staff and everyone in Public Works and Director Moon for making sure that these presentations are thorough, easy to understand, and helpful in our analysis as we go forward. Some of the charges are being spread out as Deputy President pointed out, keeping the rate increase reasonable for our ratepayers and those that live in town going forward. Capital costs are not going down. Certainly they are rising as well, and it would appear that we have done a thorough job of looking at the projects that we've currently put out and completed that have some extra capacity that is being used by new users as they come in and connect to the system in terms of GFC charges. And then there's a reasonable calculation in terms of the projects that are still to be built, and those projects are necessary to account for that new growth that's coming in as well, and those GFC charges appear to adequately account for that over time as new people connect to the system. It is a pretty steep increase. However, construction costs are going up, cost of labor is going up as well, and I think we've done a fairly good job of trying to anticipate those changes as we go forward and make sure that the cost of the new construction is correctly calculated so that those GFCs can account for that new construction cost itself along the way. So appreciate the work that everyone in Public Works has done on this. Look forward to the presentation in October, and we will see what we can do to get this passed so that it will be part of the budget in January 1st, 2026. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us on to the next topic. That's COM 0137, Transportation Concurrency Policy Update. I saw Jillian Straub, our management analyst here. Looks like we'll hear the presentation on this topic next. Thank you.
All right, thank you for having me. All right, my name is Jillian Straub. I'm a management analyst in the executive office, and with us tonight to talk about multimodal transportation concurrency policy, we have John Mortensen, our transportation engineering manager online, Thomas Faldries, our senior transportation planner, Kendra Breland, and Torsten Lienau, two of our consultants who are working on this effort with us. So we're here tonight to present our recommended changes to the transportation concurrency policy to incorporate further multimodal considerations and to receive your feedback before this proceeds to City Council on November 10th. So we have 5 direction needed questions here, and they're a little bit jargony, so I'm going to walk through them and propose that we, if it's okay with the chair, propose that as we walk through the policy changes a little bit later in the presentation, we walk through each of these 5 policy changes discreetly, see if there are any clarifying questions that you all have, and then see if there's any feedback you have on that item, so that way we don't lose your feedback from item number 1 by the time we get all the way down to the last item. If that's okay with you, that's how we'd like to proceed tonight.
That sounds just fine. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. And now I'll break this down in language that's a little bit less jargony, so that you have a kind of pretext for what changes we're proposing. So the first question asks if we should change the way we map our bike trail shared use pass and bike lanes throughout the city to incorporate slope to better capture what it feels like to actually ride on Issaquah's bike facilities. The second question asks if we should change our, if we should make changes to our pedestrian level of service guidelines in central Issaquah and on some of our local streets. Our third question here asks if we should add leading pedestrian interval, which allows pedestrians to get out into the intersection a few seconds before the cars that they're parallel with, on those priority pedestrian corridors. We're asking you this in part because there's a possibility of auto delay anytime we change signal timing. So that's one of the trade-offs here. The trade-offs for question 4 for transit signal priority, which allows buses to move through intersections quicker, also has that same possibility of auto delay because we're changing the signal timing there. And then the 5th question is a little bit broader than the last 4 questions. So we're proposing a new transit level of service policy based on the frequency of transit service and incorporating considerations around mobility. So again, that frequency of service, access, how people get to a bus stop, and place, what amenities are in place at a bus stop. So we're going to want to hear if those are the right things to consider in this new transit level of service. All right, and our recommendation, we'll go through what exactly our recommendation is for each of these, but we recommend that you support these changes and recommend them for adoption by the City Council in November. This is because these enhance our ability to build stronger, safer, and more reliable multimodal connections throughout the city. We brought these items to the Transportation Advisory Board 4 times over the course of the last year. Their fingerprints are all over this work, and they've really enhanced what we're proposing to you tonight. And they supported these changes, both the large policy changes and how they're incorporated in our transportation element and mobility action plan. We brought these same items to PPC, both those large policy changes and how they're incorporated in documents, and they were also supportive, but we can get into a little bit more nuance of that feedback as needed when we talk about each of the items. Okay, you all have probably heard about concurrency, not just as it relates to this project, so we wanted to give you kind of a sense of other touch points with the concurrency process that you've had and some next steps for this larger kind of work. So in 2023, we conducted a concurrency model update that assesses demand at different intersections for different modes, but largely assesses what vehicular demand is, both now and into the future. So we did that in 2023. We're supposed to do that every 3 to 5 years by code. So you see it on our next steps list as well to pursue in the next 3 or so years, an update to that model. This year, we're proposing that policy update that you see there. And additional next steps include changes or updates to the Transportation Improvement Plan. These are the projects that help achieve our level of service guidelines that are in our Transportation Concurrency Policy. And I promise we have a bit of an explainer on how all of this links together in a minute. But these are the projects that are supposed to help us meet our level of service guidelines, so we're proposing that as a next step, as well as reviewing if our impact and mitigation fees, the fees we collect from developers to do these projects, to make sure they're meeting our project needs now that we're proposing some new levels of service and some new tools to get there through part of this, through this policy update. So those are potential next steps for this work over the next couple of years. Okay, so our project goals for this work. So this started, there was an opportunity to open this up because state law change, the Growth Management Act, required that cities and counties review their level of service to further incorporate multimodal considerations. We found, this is the first thing that our consultants looked at, and they found that our current system was in compliance with the state requirements. However, they noted, and they had the ability to review our documents, including the transportation element and the mobility action plan, and they, as well as staff, noted that this would be an opportunity to better align some of our level of service guidelines and our tools with some of the other goals incorporated in those plans. So we took that opportunity to have more of a multimodal focus for this work. We also know that in addition to the transportation element and the map, the goals around ridership for transit and use of bike facilities and pedestrian connections are important in our strategic plan and some of the performance measures enshrined there. And we also know from the 2025 community survey, as you're familiar, it mapped 17 major services on importance and satisfaction, and public transit and bike facilities were well within the top 10 of those that were mapped to importance and satisfaction. What that tells us is that these are services that our community has said is important, but we are maybe not meeting their needs entirely. So this is an opportunity to address some of that and better enable us to do that through this work. And then I think we should note here that the community survey also tells us that flow of traffic is a huge concern in Issaquah. You're not going to see that directly addressed through this work. We have opportunities to do that through the concurrency model updates and updating the transportation improvement plan, the TIP. But this is kind of an off-cycle opportunity to focus on some of those multimodal considerations. So with that, you've probably seen some version of this flow before, but I just wanted to share that the level of service guidelines that tell us how connected our pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users should be across the system are enshrined in the transportation element goals and policies. They're then mirrored in the mobility action plan, but the mobility action plan also includes further actions, tools, resources to achieve those level of service guidelines. So you'll see changes to both proposed today. Okay, and now a little bit of background on our transportation concurrency system. So like I've already mentioned, it's mandated through the Growth Management Act that our transportation improvements are made concurrently with growth or within 6 years. So when a new development is proposed, its impact on the traffic or the transportation system is evaluated, and we need to assess fees to ensure that any new trips or new traffic added as a result of this new development has paid fees to offset that increase in traffic, so we can use those fees for projects that keep our intersections at our established level of service guidelines. So we do that through a couple of ways. In our standard and measurement section here on the slide, we have automobile, pedestrian, and transit level of service, and then we have bike level of traffic stress that sets some of our goals for the system. And these are what we essentially say all of our intersections and different facilities should be at throughout the system. We update and project demand on the system through the technical concurrency model. Developers pay fees to offset those downgrades in level of service and for new trips added. And we use those fees to, like I said, do the projects that will mitigate any transportation impacts. And we do that through and we set those guidelines through our transportation concurrency policy. I'd like to pause here and see if there are any questions on how transportation concurrency works before we dive into our proposed changes.
No questions. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are proposing 5 changes today, and I went over a little bit about what each of these means before, and we're about to go over them in more depth. I want to share that the Transportation Advisory Board was largely supportive of these changes. They noted a need to ensure that investments that are made in our system are practical and feasible. They also requested that we consider auto delay through the impacts to cars, essentially, that might result from these changes. We're aligned in the sense that we know we want to get to a place where folks can go to school or to work, and transit is just as good as an option, or biking or walking as a car, but we know that the reality in Issaquah today is that many folks need a car to get around. So that's included in a lot of the language that you see in our redlined mobility action plan and transportation element. And they also requested that we, sorry, one sec, just reviewing my notes. That we highlight safety considerations where possible. Some of our changes were driven by safety, and some of the changes we've made to the documents meet the moment in terms of safety. At this time, I'd like to invite up Kendra Breland to discuss our first couple of items. From there, she'll pass it to Torsten, and you can actually come up here if you'd like. And then you can click through the slides or tab through.
All right, good evening, council members. Let me get my notes here. Looks like we're in good shape. Okay, well, I'm here to quickly describe recommended changes to the way that the city measures conditions for bicycling. The city's current measure considers a bicycle's level of traffic stress based on traffic speeds and roadway volumes. The recommended change that we're bringing to you tonight is a PSRC endorsed approach to incorporate slope into the calculation. Given Issaquah's topography, the TAB felt this provided a much more realistic depiction of conditions, and this added considerations allows the city to more realistically plan bike accommodating infrastructure. So the transportation element and MIP would receive added language summarizing this new methodology. So you can see a map here, and this map really just incorporates, it shows Issaquah's formal biking facilities, but it incorporates topography. And something that you'll notice, it probably looks much more stressful. The colors are more red and darker than they were prior. And that, I think just gives us a more realistic depiction. If you're going to put a lot of money into a capital facility, we want to make sure that we're truly getting what we want out of it. So this allows us to plan much more eyes wide open. I would note that there are many low-speed, low-volume residential streets, obviously throughout the city. Those are an important kind of informal component of our bike network, but this updated analysis might help us to think a little differently about our bike network moving forward. So the direction that we are looking for tonight from you is just to answer the questions: should slope be added to the methodology for bicycle level of traffic stress to more accurately map and plan bicycle infrastructure?
Do you have any questions about that? Okay. I guess this is a new concept to us, so please forgive us if we're asking questions that are too basic. Does the bicycle level of traffic stress go into the calculation for the impact fees that developers potentially will pay? In other words, it is a measure of how good or stressful our roads are for bicyclists. It's a new measure that I think captures things, but how will it be used? Is it used how is it used to improve our infrastructure, or is it just used to measure the stress of our infrastructure to bicyclists?
That's an excellent question. So it doesn't directly factor into an impact fee calculation. We're not going to be asking developers to look at the level of stress on a given bike facility. That's a pretty technical calculation, and that's why the city is doing that measurement up front. What it's going to help the city to do is to update your capital list. So That's one of the key components moving towards updating your impact fee program. First, you've got to get all the projects right. And so this analysis is intended to help you to better plan your bike infrastructure, figure out, hey, these facilities are really worth the investment. Maybe these ones are so steep, maybe we need to think about something else. And once you have that capital list defined, it's in your plans, then you can go about updating your impact fee program. There's been a movement statewide to much more multimodal programs, and a recommendation I've talked to your staff about is thinking about updating that program and really incorporating some of those key facilities. That's, more and more prevalent all over the state today.
Thank you for that explanation. That's helpful. I'd like to put it into a practical world example that this committee's been dealing with, which is putting a bike trail along Mountain Park Boulevard, one of our steep hills here. And we were presented with a number of different options in terms of separation from traffic and the bulbs that, I'm probably calling it the wrong name, but the barriers that can exist to protect a bicyclist, et cetera, et cetera. Using this BLTS, how would it help us analyze a project like that?
Well, it'll help us to understand how many cyclists is it likely to help. So I'm not familiar with the exact facility you're talking about, but you're mentioning a big grade. We might look at it, realize that given the grade, this facility is never something that a lot of people are going to be on. Again, haven't looked at this specific facility, so this is all theoretical. It might help us to think through, well, what are some of those other options? Maybe we hadn't considered this other potentially longer route. Maybe it's local roads, but if we can at least recognize that topography is maybe something that we just can't get around. Unfortunately, we can't cut off our roads and make a bunch of plateaus in Issaquah. It kind of helps us to think about maybe there are alternative approaches that are going to give us a better bang for our buck. And by bang, I mean building a facility that's more all ages and all abilities friendly for the amount that we're spending.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Did you have a question?
Right, and again, forgive me if this is Bike 101, but the last time that I was over by 12th, which goes up in Issaquah, there were 2 e-bikes coming down. So I was just wondering, or when we talk about this bicycle study and so forth, were these pedal bikes that we're talking about, or are we looking at these e-bikes that seem to be proliferating everywhere lately?
For this level of traffic stress, it doesn't necessarily differentiate between an e-biker and a standard biker. As a person that has both an e-bike and a standard bike, I know there's a big difference. One thing I like to share, we are seeing an increase in people who are willing to bike because of e-bikes. That's wonderful. We are also seeing, of course, some growing pains. E-bikes are going faster. Sometimes there's conflicts in bike facilities. So that's something that we are navigating as a profession. The one thing that I always love to share with folks, whether you're on an e-bike or a standard bike, you are still a very vulnerable rider. So as communities, we really need to think about providing safe facilities for all.
Thank you. Go ahead and keep going.
Wonderful. Thank you. So the next mode I'm going to talk about is pedestrian level of service. So first of all, just to describe the recommended adjustments to the city's pedestrian level of service standard. This policy really helps to guide which streets should have sidewalks based on expected usage and pedestrian activity and connectivity. The recommended adjustments provide a better match to the central Issaquah plan and provide additional options for how people, or for how to provide safe walking conditions. These updates will help the city to reevaluate the project list, again, to prioritize sidewalk improvements where they are needed most. And so I will continue with that. Here's a map. So previous policy really limited some of the most, I would say, intensive sidewalk requirements. We're really looking for those super high quality sidewalks on both sides of the street, best amenities. Really it focused it just within the Regional Growth Center, which is the area in green. And we're recognizing that really all of central Issaquah should be in that equation. So that's one of the major changes in this new policy. So really when we look at kind of what's being recommended here. Big changes to expand Tier 1 requirements. Again, those are where you've got, high amenity sidewalks both sides of the street, to arterials and collectors throughout central Issaquah, not just limited to the Regional Growth Center. It also provides some additional flexibility in how we think about accommodating pedestrians kind of more on your residential roadways. Before, we've kind of said, well, you got to have speed limits 20 miles or less, but something that the city engineer really called and TAB agreed with is, hey, if there's a sidewalk on those, at least on one side of the street, that should count too for kind of meeting that standard. So again, providing some additional flexibility and some refinements to the policy also we're looking at here. And the proposal is really to add these wording changes to policy D1 to reflect that. Sorry. Question, yes, here's the question. Sorry, I'm a little inexperienced on kind of this, but, just the direction here, do the changes to the pedestrian level of service match the prioritized pedestrian connections where they're needed most, and do, you agree with the changes to add needed flexibility?
Do you have any questions on this section? Okay. In my discussion with citizens in town, they see all the growth that's going on and the new construction that's going on. And they wonder, or they ask me, what are we, the city, doing to improve their mobility within the city? We touched on bikes a little bit with the measure that you presented to us. How does this help our pedestrians get around more safely and more easily in town when I get asked that question?
Okay, I'll start with answering it, and I know John Mortensen is on, and I'm sure he's very excited to contribute to that, but my quick response to you, we are helping the city, the level of service policies, it all seems a little bit abstract, but where really the, kind of rubber hits the road is in helping you to refine your project list. So I think this is doing a better job of reflecting, hey, we need to provide higher pedestrian amenity throughout central Issaquah. That's where we're seeing a lot of the growth. So it's adding it to requirements. So when a developer occurs on there, this is adding it to your frontage requirements. And eventually, when we get to impact fees, again, this is helping these projects to be a part of that list.
I see John Mortensen has lit up his camera. If you'd like to give some comment.
Yes, I'd like to add just a little bit to it. I think what we were talking about was absolutely spot on about helping the city prioritize. One other thing that also gets considered when the administration puts together the capital improvement plan and transportation improvement program is balancing meeting the needs of the current residents with planning and meeting the needs of the future residents. And so that is something that always gets put into it, not necessarily into this policy, but it's always something that is really considered when we put together our 6-year improvement plans.
Yeah, thank you for that. You do point out an interesting fact that in all the policies that we discuss and think about, the utility rate study was an example. We on council need to think about making sure that our citizens are taken care of, but also plan appropriately for the future and the new growth that's coming, both with pedestrians and with other transportation concurrency issues. So thanks for pointing that out. Other questions?
So I'll try to come up with a question because I have a comment, and but we'll see if I can make it into a question. But we know that pedestrian deaths are the highest I believe they've ever been in Washington State history, and so this is really, really important that we're addressing this. And just being out there, I noticed that people are like running across the streets, and it's because drivers get really frustrated with the slowness. There just seems to be this kind of clash. So what are the elements that when we're looking at this, what are the elements we're looking at in terms of sight lines and crosswalks and those kinds of things that that help pedestrians get across and don't create also such a jam that the drivers are totally frustrated and then apt to make mistakes as well.
I see John's on, so I'm going to give him the
Oh,
opportunity to
good.
jump on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would say that concerning safety of pedestrians, especially with crossings, that's more of what we do on the engineering level, whether it's doing a specific crossing study or coming up with engineering standards for crossings, versus what we're doing tonight is talking about just general policy on where, at very high level, where to put sidewalk, where to prioritize sidewalk. But in terms of the safety of how the sidewalk will function, lives more at the engineering design level. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. And also, I'm just wondering what we do in terms of, once we've put in a sidewalk or whatever, it'd be interesting to know how citizens can alert us to possible dangers, or where they're seeing problems, or where they're seeing often near accidents and so forth. Do we have a system for reporting those kinds of things?
We do, and that's through C-Click Fix. And so we get a lot of requests from residents on various traffic concerns and safety issues that get reported to the city to put any requests for crossing improvements. And then the Transportation Engineering Division, we, once a week, they evaluate those and to implement or how to respond to residents.
Thank you, John.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't think, that's a wonderful segue to the next policy that I think that Torsten's going to talk about. It's leading pedestrian intervals. So that speaks incredibly directly to your question. So I'm going to yield the mic for a bit.
It does indeed, but we first make sure that you can hear me. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good evening, council members. Thank you for having me here tonight, and I'm pleased to talk about the next two policies. And as Kendra pointed out, that last question leads directly into a pedestrian safety policy that we're considering tonight, and that is leading pedestrian interval. What it does is it allows pedestrians to enter the crosswalk before vehicles get a green light. So it actually gives them some advanced crossing time. LPI enhances pedestrian safety by establishing the pedestrian in the crosswalk before vehicles can enter. It increases their visibility and reinforces the right-of-way of the pedestrian. LPI has a proven record of enhancing pedestrian safety, and it's one of the reasons why we're considering it tonight. Is someone able to advance to the next slide? Great. LPI, while great for pedestrians, as Jillian had pointed out earlier in the presentation, could have a negative impact on delay experienced by vehicles. So to determine the impact experienced by vehicles, we did a test model run using the city's latest transportation concurrency model. And we actually implemented LPI at all of the signals that are on the Tier 1 pedestrian streets. That's 77 signalized intersections, and the map that's on the screen right now, I know it's very complicated, but those are the 77 intersections that we did a test run of LPI. What we did was assume a 4-second lead time, so pedestrians will get 4 seconds amount of time to enter the crosswalk and start crossing before any vehicle will see a green light. The results of that analysis are shown on the map. It is a very complicated map. I'm happy to go into detail if you so desire, but to cut to the chase, what I will say is of the 77 intersections, 4 will operate at level service E or, well, at level service E. The rest all operate at D or better. That meets the city's concurrency standards. And the most delay that was experienced at any one intersection was 7 seconds. So basically, it was a very little impact on vehicle delay, but the trade-off being an increased safety for pedestrians. Could someone change to the next slide? Thank you. So staff is recommending to implement LPI along all Tier 1 pedestrian corridors. However, also monitoring and evaluating vehicular delay as it gets implemented to ensure that the city maintains its level of service standards. What that will entail is a change to a policy, a MAP policy, and a comprehensive plan policy with some actions to upgrade the pedestrian push buttons at all intersections where this is implemented, update the signal timing, and then continue to monitor automobile level of service at those intersections. Both TAB and PPC supported this recommendation, and if we could go to the next slide. We are asking for your direction tonight. Does adding LPI to priority pedestrian corridors appropriately prioritize pedestrian safety with the possibility of some additional auto delay?
Deputy Council President, do you have any questions? Okay, thanks for that presentation. I had a couple of questions.
You bet.
So I wasn't able to tell whether or not putting this in place reduces the amount of time that I, as a driver going through that intersection, have to cross that intersection. In other words, sometimes it's 30 seconds is the interval, or 1 minute. If we do this, does it do the 4 seconds that are given to the pedestrian cut 4 seconds off of the time that the auto traffic has in the intersection?
So the complicated answer is it depends. It doesn't necessarily equate to a 4-second reduction for every movement at the intersection, but some movements will see a reduction. Some may actually see an increase in time to get through the intersection. It's basically it's a balancing act, and it depends on the number of vehicles and the movement at the intersection as to how much of an increase or decrease in time the vehicle will get to go through the intersection. But overall, at the 77 intersections, we saw very little impact overall.
Okay, thank you. And will there always be a 4-second delay, even if there's not a pedestrian that has hit the button to cross that particular intersection?
Excellent question, and the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. And just so I can kind of visualize what this might entail, there is along the East Lake Trail, we do have a no right turn sign that's over by the McDonald's and the Joker Pub and the Brown Bear Car Wash. And when there are people that are on the trail that are trying to go north-south and they've hit the button, that no right turn signal lights up and gives them an opportunity to clear that intersection before people might take a right-hand turn at an inappropriate speed or not pay attention as much as they should at that particular intersection. Is that something that's beyond this program that we might also look at, or is that something similar to the kind of programs that we might see if this program is implemented?
So the no right turn on red, and I see John also got on screen, but in general, it's not directly related to LPI. However, it is a tool that's used by staff and engineers when there is a pedestrian, a high pedestrian movement, or there are known incidents related to pedestrians. No right on red is a tool that's used to help improve the safety for pedestrians. And so I think that would be a case-by-case basis. And so I will turn that over now to John to make sure that I didn't say anything out of turn.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that is 100% correct. It's a case-by-case basis, and at East Lake Sammamish Parkway and 56th with the King County Trail there. That was a unique situation where we implemented those signs.
Thank you, John. Are we considering potentially doing that in any other places? And I don't need an answer right now, but if you could send an email out to the committee members, I would appreciate just ones that might be on the radar, so to speak. I talked to a bicyclist that likes to go all the way around Lake Sammamish in one day. It would take me about 3 weeks to do that, but she does it in one day and has informed me of trouble areas and places where the pavement is not perfect. So I am just interested in what we're doing here and some of the projects that might be on the radar for that. Thank you.
Yes, I can follow up with an email.
Fantastic. Go ahead.
So I'm looking at this map, and it looks like that one of the E intersections is Front and Sunset. And I'm just wondering, I know we have this multi-directional crossing on Gilman, and I'm just wondering, allowing people to go to, just having an open pedestrian bi-directional crossing, does that help the situation, or is that another delay that causes drivers to get really frustrated? And maybe I'm reading that map wrong. I see an E, it looks like it's Front and Sunset, but I'm not sure.
It is.
Oh.
John, were you going to address this?
Well, Torsten, can you speak to high level, and then I can talk specifically about that location?
So I guess what I would say first of all is the map that we did here and the analysis that we did was mostly just to give decision makers, council members, committee members, something to see what the impact might be. The fact, once LPI is implemented at this particular intersection, the city will do everything they can to adjust signal timing so that hopefully we don't maintain a level service E. Maybe we can get something a little bit better, or maybe we do a 3-second interval instead of a 4-second interval. So there are lots of options for us to consider to try and minimize delay. So that would be the first thing that we would do, is to try and always maintain level service D wherever we can. So that's sort of just an overall, I wouldn't get too set on the fact that we are showing that particular intersection at an E. Other than that, John, I'm not sure I understood the question about the two phase.
I think the question was if really an intersection with a lot of pedestrians was changed from traditional crosswalks to a scramble intersection, if that would improve the situation or make it worse. And I know the answer for that location, but I don't know if there's any general guidance on that.
I think that is also, it really depends on the traffic volumes and which movements have the highest volumes as to whether or not we could make a pedestrian scramble work and still maintain a level of service. And John, you said you have looked at pedestrian scramble at this particular intersection?
Yeah, the city did a study back in 2018 that actually evaluated what would happen if that intersection was to be converted to a scramble similar to what we have at the Three Trails crossing at Gilman, Juniper, and Rainier. And it greatly increased the delay at that intersection and made it a lot worse for the automobile.
And that generally is the case because if the intersection is already at capacity, you are creating a whole nother phase at the intersection where no vehicles can move at all. Whereas when you've got the traditional pedestrian crossings, there are at least some vehicles moving that are not in conflict with the pedestrians, and that helps with the delay. So it generally makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead and keep on keeping on, so to speak.
All right, so the next policy is transit signal priority. Essentially, transit signal priority senses a transit vehicle is approaching an intersection, and without significant undue delay, the signal would potentially extend the green phase as the bus is approaching the intersection, so that the bus can get through the intersection and clear it. Or if a bus is approaching the intersection and it's a red light, the signal would sense that a bus is approaching, and it might cut the other phases short and turn the phase on to green, so that the bus never ends up slowing down or stopping and continues through the intersection. So that's generally what transit signal priority is. What it does, and why we would consider it, is it aids in the speed and reliability of transit, which are key factors in actually increasing ridership for transit. Thank you. For the next slide. All right, similar to leading pedestrian interval, we wanted to test what would happen to intersections if we were to implement TSP, because it does have also an impact to vehicular delay. So we tested the implementation of TSP at the 41 intersections in the city through which transit vehicles pass. Those are shown on the map, on the graphic. We had to make some assumptions in order to do this analysis, such as 30% of the transit vehicles we assumed would already be hitting the green phase, and there would be no need to change the signal timing or extend the green time at all, so there would be no impact for at least 30% of the signal cycles. And then also the frequency of buses differs at each of the 41 intersections. Some intersections might see 10 or more buses through the intersection, and some will see significantly less. And as a result, that also affects the number of cycles that are impacted by TSP. So there were assumptions made on that as well, based on the frequency of buses at each of the intersections. Nevertheless, we did see a significantly higher impact to level of service when you implement TSP as opposed to the leading pedestrian interval. Increases in delay ranged more around 26 to 47 seconds, where we saw the biggest impact. There are a number of intersections where there wasn't a lot of impact. And so, but where there was an impact, they were significantly higher than LPI. And if we were to implement a TSP at all 41 intersections, 8 of those intersections would degrade to a level service E or F. That would not meet the city's current level of service standard. And so, you know, the recommendation here is we're not going to look at TSP at every single intersection, but rather use engineering judgment to determine where some of those improvements would be needed. Thank you for going to the next slide. Staff is recommending that TSP should be a tool available to the city to improve the reliability and speed of transit, but also realizes that additional mitigation may be needed to ensure that the city's level of service standards are maintained. And so wherever TSP might be considered, there would be additional studies needed to determine and make sure that the level of service doesn't degrade below the city's standard. It's important to point out Metro and Sound Transit are still ultimately in charge of bus routes. And so, again, if bus routes change, that would also require changes to the TSP at the intersections. But this sets the city up for success in requesting higher frequency transit if we can show that we've implemented TSP to allow for better reliability. Both the TAB and PPC agreed with the staff's recommendation, and so we are, the next slide, sorry, so the direction that we're asking for is, does adding TSP to priority transit corridors appropriately prioritize transit speed and reliability with the possibility of auto delay?
Okay, thank you. No questions. The question I had was, I travel SR 900 coming back from Seattle and Bellevue at 5 p.m. in the afternoon. And when I turn onto SR 900, there is that separate bus lane to my right as I exit. And when I get to the intersection, there's a red light. The lane for the bus will turn green first before the general purpose lanes do. Is that an aspect of this, or is that something that will be implemented as part of this?
It is absolutely, that is already one example of TSP in the city. So we'd be looking at other locations where we could do something similar. We wouldn't necessarily always add a separate lane for the buses to those are called queue jumps, by the way.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we wouldn't be necessarily looking at doing that at every TSP intersection. There are other types of TSP that can be done where the bus is in the general purpose lane with other vehicles. But yes, what you observe and what you drive through when you're on a bus, that is TSP.
Okay, and so my next question then is, it looks like in the transit signal priority and auto delay map that coming off of eastbound 90 to 900, it looks like it degrades to a D with a 26.4 second delay, and then the next intersection degrades to an E with a 19.8 second delay. Is that delay, did that delay anticipate the kind of queue jump that we talked about at those intersections already? And why do we see, if not, why do we see such a big jump there in terms of time delay?
You bet. Because we're looking at the other direction as well. So that average is considering TSP now operating in the northbound direction as well. And we did not assume queue jumps at the at Gilman and SR 900. That's the Lowell Service E intersection. So when you include queue jumps, generally that helps to mitigate the impacts of TSP. And since the road is already pretty wide there, and that would increase the pedestrian crossing distance as well, we did not look at queue jumps at that particular intersection or in the northbound direction at the ramp, at the I-90 ramps.
Okay, and I guess the next question would be directed to John a little bit. The road is already pretty wide with the separate southbound transit lane dedicated off of eastbound 90 to southbound 900. And then on the other side, there's a dedicated carpool lane there. So if we were to implement a TSP, it seems that the road is already pretty wide. Could we take a look at that intersection a little bit more closely to see if including queue jump with TSP might improve times a little bit or degrade times a little bit less than what we're seeing on here? Or John, you might have already done that, so I'll just throw it over to you.
Yeah. So what we did with this project is just make a lot of assumptions and just tried to generally see what would happen to the city's transportation system if we implemented this. Now, in the future, when the city is looking at actually doing a project to implement TSP and or queue jump lanes to try and improve the speed and reliability of transit, then we would look specifically at a transit corridor, look at each intersection. It would be much more specific and less based on a series of assumptions. And so those are the kind of things we would look at, but it would be very corridor specific instead of just a high level. This is generally what happens if we were to implement TSP.
Okay, appreciate that background. Thank you. Go ahead then with the presentation if there are no other questions from the committee.
I just wanted to, Torsten, if I could interrupt briefly. Thanks. I just wanted to point out two things. So first, the possibility to add queue jump lanes is written into the mobility action plan as something that we're going to look at to make sure that we're considering auto delay and noting that as one of the tools. The second, I just want to point out that Tab spent a lot of time talking with us about how we came up with this map and some of the assumptions that were made. And we were perhaps overly cautious in how much we anticipated auto delay on this map. I can't give you an exact recalibration to say those intersections we were looking at are actually probably level of service D rather than E. But when we talked through all the different factors that we had included, there was a sense from Tab that we were overly cautious and overly anticipated the possibility of auto delay. But like Torsten and John have mentioned, we're going to take a look at those specific intersections where we could implement it to see when, in reality, what the impact might be. I just wanted to point that out before we moved on.
No, it's helpful, thank you.
Good evening again. I'm back for kind of my final topic here tonight. So we wanted to talk about proposed changes to your transit level of service policy. So first of all, what's shown on the screen is what you have as a policy today. And I would note that it speaks only to conditions at transit stops. So scoring them based on the presence of amenities like shelters, real-time information, benches, trash receptacles, etc. The proposed changes to the policy would speak more comprehensively to overall transit conditions. So recognizing that not all transit services are the same, we've developed policy guidance for 3 different transit types. First of all, frequent service, very frequent service, that's transit service that's showing up every 15 minutes or so during the peak hour. Issaquah doesn't currently have any of this service today, but the hope and the expectation in the future is that you will, and so we wanted to provide guidance for that. Regular service is kind of every other type of fixed route service that's not quite as frequent, and then on-demand flexible services. So the policy speaks to kind of 3 aspects: mobility, place, and access. So mobility is actions the city can take to increase the speed and reliability of transit services. Place, this is similar to your current policy, which speaks to amenities at transit stops, but we've updated the guidance to reflect King County Metro guidance. And then thirdly, access, this is intended to think about how people are actually accessing transit services. And so this policy would actually have a significant overlap with the sidewalk standards, the bike level of service policy, and the crossing standards that we've been talking about tonight. So kind of bringing those all together and thinking about kind of the full package of how folks access transit. We've developed this, as I said, the most extensive guidelines for frequent transit, really thinking about how we can encourage those services to be really strong, very accessible for Issaquah folks here. For regular service, we've provided guidelines as well, and it speaks to mobility, place, and access, but just a bit less intensive, recognizing those services aren't quite as frequent. And then lastly, for flexible service, we have developed policies for the city to advocate for essentially increased service. So could we look to get it covering more parts of the city? What can the city do to kind of really help promote and make sure people know about that service and that it's available to them? So actually, we've got a map here that shows just currently the types of services that exist in Issaquah today. There's no super frequent service, but as you can see on the map to the right, I'm a little directionally challenged. You can see there is a future vision of very frequent service and just some potential guidance for the city to advocate for increased flexible transit service. Again, this isn't a promise, but I'm a big believer that you'll never get it if you don't ask for it. So this is just stating that policy desire from the city side. So focusing on kind of what the policy recommendation is really to expand your current level of service policy to speak to aspects of mobility, access, and place. And it would result in updates to policy F5. It would also result in additional narrative in your transportation element and in your MAP. So essentially, we're here tonight just to ask if this new transit level service guidance really kind of hits on the right service types, and are mobility access in place the correct considerations for transit level service.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions, Deputy President? Hey, Michelle.
So, you know, when I read this, and I think about the way that we interact with Metro, is this really a tool that staff can use to, in our discussions with Metro, letting them know that the council has set this as the direction that we'd like to see? I feel like we're really kind of at the, I know that it's difficult, for example, to get bus stops and amenities at bus stops. It takes a long time. You get in a long queue at Metro to get those services brought to you. But so generally, is this more of a direction so that staff has the backing of the council when they're discussing with Metro? Is that the purpose of this?
Well, step in, it certainly serves that purpose. I would also say, having worked as a practitioner with Metro for over a decade, having these sorts of policy intent in your, you know, kind of your transportation element, that's also very supportive. That's kind of one of the first boxes they're going to look, check, is if you're kind of in lockstep with them. I would say I want to give a lot of credit to the Transportation Advisory Board. They really pushed for us having tangible recommendations that staff can use, and so that's what's been infused into that table.
Great, thank you.
Could you go back to the map that you had showing the service areas?
Sure.
Thank you. Just for those watching, I want to make sure that we're all looking at this same thing, so to speak. The big pink area that you have there, is that the on-demand flexible service coverage area?
That's current coverage area.
Current coverage area, okay. And that's our MetroFlex?
Correct.
Does it include any other elements or just the MetroFlex?
Thomas is shaking his head, and he is the big authority here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that I have my arms around what we're measuring. In the old days, we had Dial-A-Ride or the Metro separate pickup for people with disabilities or people that need to get to appointments. And I didn't know if it also entailed our friends with Eastside Senior Services or one of those organizations. And if it only handles Metro, I appreciate that clarification. And so if I were looking at the material here, and tell me if I'm thinking about this correctly, it seems to me that as I look at it, the breaking the categories down more accurately reflects what a user of the system is going to experience, and the things that the city can think about to help their user experience and then make it more likely that they're going to use transit in their daily lives if we can get some of these elements put in over time. Is that one way to look at it?
That's perfectly stated, yes.
Perfectly stated.
Yes.
Okay, say that for the record again. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. I don't have any other questions. Do you? Okay.
Just, you know, I know that cleanliness is a big thing when it comes to bus stops, and I think TAB's trying to get at that with the inclusion of trash cans and things like that. But did TAB have any discussion? One of the worst things you can have is a bus stop that is trashy, and I mean, people just do not want to be there.
That came up. Thomas, do you want to speak to that? That was a big piece of the conversation. I'm going to move aside and let you speak to that.
And I should add that Metro, I believe, is upping its cleanliness standards, and so I understand that they recognize the issue as well. So.
They definitely do. And for the record, I'm Thomas Feldrez, Senior Transportation Planner. So TAB mentioned this a lot. We had many discussions on the issues of safety and cleanliness, security. So we've incorporated language into the mobility action plan and the transportation element that sort of directly refers to the operational nature of just maintaining bus stops. And yeah, in recent months and over the past year, there's been many discussions on this from Metro. They actually have like a cleanliness system, so it's like rated like level 4 through 1. They're implementing at every bus stop just like power washing and like really trying to make sure that everything's cleaned up. So this is something that, you know, they acknowledge if the bus stop is not clean, folks aren't going to want to use it, and they have a regular maintenance schedule that they're implementing across all bus stops across the system.
And I'll just add that there's a cute little video that you can see on Facebook, I believe, all about how they go out and clean the bus stops, if you are interested in that topic.
I am.
Yeah, I am too. Thanks.
I think you have too much time on your hands. We'll put you on another committee so you don't watch Facebook as much. Okay. Where do we go from here?
All right, so we are seeking your feedback tonight. Sorry, 1 second. On if we've included the right service types, if we've broken that out correctly, thinking about different frequencies of service, and if mobility, access, and place are the right considerations for this new transit LOS, and if we've considered the right things within each of those, because as you can see on the chart, there's quite a bit of considerations baked into that.
Okay. I'd like to circle back to one of the first comments that you made during this process. You indicated that, and maybe I'm misstating, but an evaluation of what we already do was made, and while it is sufficient perhaps from a legal standpoint and adequately handles the needs of our citizens, we are kind of taking the extra step, if you will, of really breaking down and analyzing this so that it more accurately conveys what our transportation system looks like and how there are real-world improvements that we have looked at that we can start studying for future projects. Is that kind of a good way to think about it?
That's correct. I would only add that some of the considerations for transit LOS are the things we know increase or enhance ridership, the ability to get to a bus stop safely and easily if you're biking or walking, that bus stop being clean, as we just talked about. Having this as part of our written guidelines, having actions that the city can take really around access are going to help enhance ridership, which we know are also goals.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And then in terms of is there a linkage between what we're doing here and then our ability to better understand what projects are needed for the future and better understand kind of have a better position when we are advocating for funding from whatever state or county or federal body might have money available for communities like ours?
I might defer to Thomas on the ins and outs of transportation granting. I know that having a written policy on it would certainly be advantageous, but.
Yeah, Thomas Valdez, Senior Transportation Planner. So with these discussions, like John had mentioned, these lead to project level Great. Yeah, so our policies will end up leading to specific projects. And so we do this through the Transportation Improvement Program. We have a scoring criteria that sort of leads in all this. So the fact that we have a policy related to, accessing, bus stops, we have codified that in our pedestrian standards to say that, within a certain tier, there should be a sidewalk in the vicinity of a transit stop. So we have the policy, and then that sort of helps us break it down into the project level. So when we go through that process, we look, okay, where are there gaps in the network? And then with those gaps, we can then sort of prioritize our limited funding and then sort of address where the greatest needs are.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that. Other questions from the committee? Okay. Back to you.
It's been a bit of musical chairs tonight. So just to remind you of our recommendation is to support these changes as presented, but we certainly welcome your feedback. And I'm actually quickly going to skip to next steps, so you have an idea of where this is going before we talk about your comments on these changes. So we'll have the PPC public hearing in September, and we'll include any feedback on that in further council materials. This will go to the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee, just so they have awareness of the changes that are being made as they consider other changes to the comprehensive plan. And then it'll go to City Council for action in November. So that's where we're going with this. And like we talked about before, some next steps will include updating that concurrency model, the transportation improvement plan project list, and taking a look at our impact and mitigation fees in the next couple of years. So those are the kind of further afield next steps. So with that, here are the questions we'd like your feedback on.
Fantastic, thank you. If you have no other questions, we'll open it up for public comment on the topic. If there's anyone in the room that would like to give public comment on COM 0137, they can go ahead and step forward. I don't see anyone in the room. Anyone online that might seek comment?
Yes, I do see someone with their virtual hand raised.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Those who've signed up or those who want to make comment, please press *3 when the clerk gives you the okay to unmute yourself. We encourage comments, and as a reminder, they're an important part of the public process. We take them seriously. So if you do want to comment, when recognized, unmute your microphone, state your name, address, relationship to the city, speak clearly and pause frequently, and limit comments to 5 minutes. We'll go ahead and open it up now for public comment.
I see someone with the attendee name of CM. You have been made a panelist. You should be able to unmute your microphone.
CM, if you're available, go ahead and unmute your microphone. It looks like you have taken your hand down. We'll give you a second to see if you'd like to comment. If not, we'll go ahead. Oh, your hand's back up. We have CM unmuted here. They need to unmute remotely. Is that what appears to be the?
Yes, Chair. If you're calling in from a phone, you might try to press, I believe it's *6, but otherwise on your screen you should be able to connect your audio or unmute yourself.
My script says if you're on a phone to hit *3. You might try that as well, if you're on a phone. Would CM be able to text you or communicate with you at all such that we could?
I see that they have rejoined the meeting. I think there may have been a problem. I'm going to elevate them to the level of panelist again.
Very good, thank you.
Aha, yes. Allow. Phew. Okay. No, I could not, this is Connie Marsh. I could not get seen or heard. So first things first, say hi to Torsten, because I haven't seen you in a long time. Second, this is actually one of the more thoughtful renditions of concurrence. I'm assuming you can hear me. Say yes.
Yes, we can,
okay.
Connie.
Thank you. Thoughtful renditions of concurrency and trying to figure out how to get people to walk or ride on buses. So that said, it is very limited. It may be necessary to be so limited in order to make a first step. So I'm not against it. I just want to say, in my world of transit, in order to get people to use transit, it needs to come very often. And it needs to be incredibly safe. And some of the places that people take transit from Issaquah or like downtown Seattle, and getting on the bus back from Seattle in the dark, say if you go to a game, is sketchy, right? And so one of the limitations in getting people to take the bus is outside of the city limits. It is what does Sound Transit and Metro do at each of the places or destinations where people want to go. So I guess I want to focus on the advocacy portion, because that is unclear to me, how that is organized and what is gained by having this advocacy component. Who gets the power? Are you going to be able to influence Sound Transit? Is the city council going to do something like the legislative agenda, except for they're going to do it for Metro and Sound Transit, so that we can actually gain better transit service potentially in some way? Because I don't think we're going to get the transit ridership until we get that kind of service. So that said, I'm unclear on what this advocacy is actually going to look like. That's just sort of a reiteration. Now, walking across the street, so you have these main corridors, but if people are walking, they're not just walking across those main corridors. You also, in some way, need to address the ability for people to walk everywhere in the city to get to the main corridors. And that is a mix. Now, the question that I think someone asked about how to be able to say when there's an issue, C-Click Fix is not easy to get to on the website. So if you really want people to be able to tell you what is going on in your system, you need to upgrade that linkage between issues and the ease of people to tell you about their problems. And so I'm encouraged. I think it's an interesting pathway, and I've seen a lot of different pathways that have come and gone. So I'm for following this one to see if we can make it better. When you look at traffic level of service failure, of course, our traffic fails when something happens in one of our corridors. If there's a wreck on SR 900, if there's something that happens on Issaquah Hobart Road, or one of those little tenderly streets that we use in our system, then the whole system breaks down. And so Front and Sunset, going to a level F is an every third day occurrence already. I don't know how much anymore that we can worry about being a level of service D. So I am touching the third rail. I'm saying, when are we going to reconsider the concept of level of service D for traffic as something that we need to sustain when every third day we don't? Anyway, okay, thank you for letting me speak. I'm glad I finally got on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie Marsh, for your comments. Appreciate that. And you got in under the wire, as usual. Nice. Thank you. Anyone else online that might want to provide public comment tonight?
I see no other virtual hands.
Okay, and I don't see anyone in the room that has indicated a desire to come up and speak to the committee. So we will go to the discussion portion.
All right, we have 5 questions in front of you. Happy to address them however you'd like. And they each relate to one of the 5 policy changes we've discussed tonight.
Do you have a preference?
I think I can give my input fairly quickly.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think these are the right things to send forward to the council. I'll just do a little shout out on the transit signal priority. I think that is a really good tool to add to our toolbox, and it may not work at every intersection, but it'll be there for those that where it would work. And as we grow and change, maybe in the future it will be a more usable tool, but at least it will be there for staff to have access to that. So everything here seems right. I would suggest that we pass this forward to the council. I'm looking at Andrea. Maybe we put this on the consent agenda. Depends on whether you want to tee up a greater discussion later on, but personally I think that these have been very well thought out. We have the approval of TAB and the PPC, and I think they all appear to be, to me, very reasonable. So my suggestion would be, yes, pass all of them forward to the council and put it on the consent agenda. Thank you.
I also think that all the recommendations are ripe for moving on. In terms of the consent agenda, however, I would want to wait until the public hearing is done with PPC to see if there's anything else that we haven't considered, or there's an issue out there that citizens might have that with one of the other issues there. If it passes PPC without any challenges or questions, I think then the consent agenda is probably appropriate as we go forward. But I do agree that the 4 of them are set to go, and the transit signal priority number 4 needs to be tailored a little bit right now and used as a tool for staff as needed, but is not quite ready for a full implementation throughout the entire city. Does that give you the guidance that you need in a short package? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Anything else on this topic from staff or the administration?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your assistance tonight in guiding us through this. And thank you to everyone online that joined us and chimed in to help us understand the interesting improvements that have been made and the concepts that are going to be implemented going forward. All right. That takes us to our last item on the agenda. And we are 2 hours into it, and we have 45 minutes left, but we just doubled the time that we had on the estimates. That's because we were asking such good questions. So this is COM 0165 Central Issaquah Multimodal I-90 Crossing Study Update. Greg Lucas, Senior Transportation Engineer, is here with us. And Greg, you and I had a good conversation at the Farmers Market a few weeks back as you were there, I think, presenting the project to the market patrons that were coming by to find out more about it. So I'm anxious to hear where we are landing with this project.
Thank you. And I almost got to put you to work while you were there, but let you off the hook. All right, good evening, council members. My name is Greg Lucas. I'm an engineer in the Public Works Department, and I'm here today to provide an update on the Central Issaquah Multimodal I-90 Crossing Project Study. The purpose of this evening's presentation is to discuss the administration's recommended crossing alternative for the project and to seek the committee's concurrence to move this recommendation forward to the full city council, beginning with the committee of the whole meeting later this month. Tonight, the administration is seeking 2 points of direction from the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. First, we're asking for your support of the recommended crossing alternative, specifically the proposed location and the overall concept. And second, the administration is requesting the committee's concurrence to advance this recommendation to the full city council, beginning with the committee of the whole meeting later this month. Just a note here, the administration is not seeking funding approval or authorization to proceed with the project implementation at this time. Rather, this step is intended to formally conclude the consultant-led study by identifying the preferred alternative consistent with the intent of the study. The project's been on the Transportation Improvement Program for some time, previously identified as 11th and 12th crossing, as identified in the adopted Central Issaquah plan and referenced in the environmental impact statement as a traffic mitigation measure. That means projects recognized as a key measure to address increased demand on the infrastructure from higher density development in Central Issaquah. And if this project is not implemented, level of service may fall below the city's adopted standards as traffic increases.
I had a question about the EIS. If you know the answer, great. If we need to get some additional information back to the committee, that'd be awesome too. The EIS was included in the Central Issaquah plan. Would there be circumstances, because this is a project that might impact wetlands or stream buffers and other sensitive areas, that a new EIS might be necessary, and under what conditions or kind of circumstances might that occur? And I know that's kind of a complicated answer, so I'll leave it to, if you have a short answer, fantastic. If not, leave it to the administration and to Director Moon to give any kind of email note on that. But it was just a question that came to mind as I was looking at the materials.
Sure. So my short answer is projects specifically will go through environmental impact permitting as well. So that would be addressed, say the project does impact a wetland or whatnot.
Okay.
Looking at that and mitigating it.
So included in the EIS for the Central Issaquah plan on the first line then does not indicate that that more focused look at the project will be shooed away. In other words, we will still have to do that type of on-the-ground analysis before the project goes forward.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yep. And that'd be through a NEPA and a SEPA process. So as for this study itself, in July 2022, Council directed a budget amendment directing the administration to initiate this study. Staff then conducted a qualification-based selection process and retained a consultant team led by Jacobs. Fair and Peers was a sub-consultant in that team as well. And there's many other multidisciplinary group of subject matter experts on that team as well. Later that year, Council approved the contract, which is fully funded by ARPA. Last summer, an informational update was provided while the study was ongoing and alternatives were being reviewed. In June of this year, the administration returned with a recommended option. At that Mobility and Infrastructure Committee meeting, it was determined it'd be best to seek additional input from the full council before moving forward and to return to Mobility and Infrastructure first, which is tonight's meeting. First, there are a few background slides before jumping into the crossing alternatives. The previous presentation had a lot more of that. You were there, Councilmember Joe, so if you got any questions about some of the process, about how we got here, I'm happy to answer that. You may learn about it, or we probably shared it last year as well. But this project proposes one travel lane in each direction with turn lanes where needed. It includes protected bike lanes and 8-foot wide sidewalks. And the final cross-section may evolve during the engineering phase, but the baseline assumption aligns with the corridor type that's identified in the adopted street standards. The project is located within the Central Issaquah Regional Growth Center. On this map that I'm sure you're very familiar with, the growth center is outlined in white. And for the purposes of this presentation, I drew in a couple circles to kind of help identify where the center of the growth center actually is. And that's roughly 11th, 12th, and 13th. Some of the key benefits of the project are improved north-south mobility. Today there are limited options for crossing in Central Issaquah, especially for pedestrians and cyclists. And this project helps bridge the northern and southern halves of the growth center, making it easier and safer to navigate. This project supports future light rail access, whether the station ends up adjacent to the corridor or nearby. The project will improve local circulation and help residents and visitors access the light rail more easily. Finally, it advances the Central Issaquah vision. Ultimately, this project supports the broader vision of thriving, sustainable commercial core, enhancing safety and multimodal access at the same time. So this study started with the wide open call for crossing options. No option was off the table. And then as we then looked at all the known core constraints of the project, these included site conditions such as high water tables, soft soils, existing and upcoming culverts, fish passage culverts. The grades, the valley floor makes crossing a little more challenging since I-90 and Gilman and Pickering are all at similar elevations. We also screened it to minimize impacts on today's existing private and public improvements, and was mindful of future developments, trying to reduce any uneconomic remnants. And then we're also limited by connection points, especially on the north side of I-90. And then we also wanted to make sure that the project wasn't kind of just a boring utilitarian route that was kind of an eyesore. We wanted to make sure it felt like part of the vision of the Central Issaquah. That initial feasibility study yielded 5 concepts for consideration. After a deeper analysis, 3 were advanced to be evaluated using the project goals and evaluation criteria. And those are the 3 alternatives we'll explore today. So in our overview, each crossing location, starting covering the location, the overall concept, key pros and cons. First crossing is with the 12th Ave Northwest to 11th Ave Northwest, and we'll move west to east, and the naming convention runs on the south side to the north side. So this location, 12th Ave, is the intersection this ties into on the south side. 11th is north. So this crossing concept begins at the existing intersection of 12th Ave Northwest and Gilman Boulevard, and then ties into 11th Ave near Lake Drive on the north side. To accommodate the elevation difference across I-90, Gilman would need to be raised a couple feet on the south side, and then the approach would taper westward to lengthen the runway to get the necessary elevation gain to get over I-90. After spanning the freeway, the structure then dives back down to meet Lake Drive at the intersection with 11th. We tried to draw the alignment as best we could to reduce impacts to the existing buildings. One advantage of this alternative is the proximity to Sound Transit's representative project. That is the alignment approved in the voter package, which is relatively vague, but it kind of mentions SR 900 as about the location where they think it will terminate. Sound Transit staff has shared that the project is unlikely to push that much farther east due to the additional costs that land on them. So we thought this was beneficial to be near the representative project. This project also minimizes impacts from the geotechnical conditions in the area. It does that by placing abutments above the ground and having a span over I-90 with probably a one single deep foundation column in the medium. And finally, this crossing sits near the center of the designated growth area, which helps capture the greatest volume of trips on foot, bike, or transit. Off to the side alignments tend to serve fringe parcels a little better. On the downside, it's the closest option to an existing crossing. It's still about 1,200 feet from SR 900. So it's long enough not to make it too redundant, but just for information, this one is the closest to an existing crossing. It also features the longest span of all the alternatives. Requires users to climb and descend further with no opportunities to exit mid-span. That extra distance may feel out of the way for travelers who tend or who are traveling to destinations that don't lie directly north or south of the crossing. And lastly, even with this alignment, construction likely inevitably impacts some of these buildings, even as we look to try to reduce that as much as possible. All right, the next crossing to examine is the next one east is the 11th to 11th Ave Northwest crossing. On the south side, it begins at a new signalized intersection of 11th Ave Northwest with an elevated Gilman Boulevard, then spans over I-90 and lands on a north side abutment in Pickering Place and ties into 11th Ave Northwest. To clear the freeway, Gilman would likely need to be raised by roughly 20 feet, and the final grades of that would be need to be explored during the engineering phase. And this option preserves the southernmost eastbound lane of Gilman and the adjacent landscaping and sidewalk at the existing grade. And for context, there's a little snippet of Royal Brome at the mayor's facility, which I'll just try to show what a bypass lane would look like next to an elevated structure.
What was that about Royal Brome?
I
parked there on Friday at the little
Royal
parking
Brome's
lot.
got a bypass lane. I think it's more of a turnaround there though. And it's also got the structure that kind of goes up and over. So if you could picture Royal Brome, a similar concept would be needed on Gilman.
Okay, so the easy slope would be something that would be similar to what we might see here.
Yeah.
But the corkscrew on the other side, we would not see.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes. No corkscrew. Much like the previous concept, this alignment stays close to the voter-approved representative project from Sound Transit, and it offers even greater flexibility for station and park and ride placement, thanks to more available acreage in this concept. Also similar to the previous concept, the aerial configuration effectively mitigates the geotechnical risks, which are the high groundwater and soft soils. A column in the freeway would mean we could shorten the span and likely reduce the girder dimensions, the girder dimension heights. So basically reducing the amount that we need to raise Gilman to make this feasible. From a cost and delivery standpoint, it outperforms the other two crossings. It's got fewer curves, shorter overall span, a more direct profile makes this the most economical option. This concept is feasible. Maybe we could do Gilman first and then do the rest of it later. Take a bite-sized approach if that was beneficial to the city. And there could be opportunities to work with private developments in the Pickering area as well. Non-motorized users would enjoy a shorter crossing here. They wouldn't feel trapped mid-span like they would on the 12th to 11th crossing. And this alternative strikes the best balance between congestion relief and safe and effective multimodal movement. And this concept connects to and helps activate Pickering Place, which is ripe for redevelopment, and would help connect to the street network. And one design challenge for this alternative is crafting a functional tie-in to Northwest Gilman Boulevard and the existing south side infrastructure. And again, this would be something we could look at in an engineering phase, but there are options to make that better.
So if I'm hearing that last comment, there's some concern about the way the traffic would exit that overpass, and then the potential congestion there and the pedestrian interface that might be there as well. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah, a little less concerned about the vehicles and making sure the bikes and pedestrians have easier tie-ins to Gilman. It doesn't take much for a car to drive an extra few hundred feet, but it might discourage pedestrians and cyclists.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and the last concept to discuss tonight is the Northwest Maple Street to Lake Drive concept. This alignment begins at the signalized intersection of Northwest Maple and Northwest Gilman Boulevard, goes under I-90 and lands at the existing roundabout on Southeast 62nd Street and Lake Drive, which the initial traffic model shows it would likely need to become signalized. To minimize the required elevation change on I-90, the structure of the roadway would dive as deeply as it can in the underlying soils and return to existing grades. Then in the geotechnical conditions will be the ultimate constraint on how far down it could go. However, adjusting grades at I-90 is a tall task, so we want to reduce that as much as possible. So the strength of this concept is that it moves the most traffic in the initial traffic models. While the crossing alternative moves vehicles more adequately, this concept seems to move, well, it's likely due to the connection to Maple, which ultimately connects to Newport, making it a little bit more of a regional crossing as well. That said, the motorists will encounter pedestrian conflicts at the mini roundabout on Maple and the multiple at-grade crossings recently added at the Costco campus along Lake Drive. Balancing vehicular flow with pedestrian safety is critical. This may be too much traffic without improving the existing pedestrian crossings. Of the three options, this alternative presents the highest geotechnical and regulatory risk. A permanent stormwater pumping system may be required to address the elevated water table, adding long-term operational complexities. According to WashDOT staff, no local agency in the region has undertaken freeway grade change elevation such as this, underscoring its kind of unprecedented nature. And the permitting process would be likely lengthy and uncertain with no assurance of approvals. Furthermore, maintaining freeway traffic during construction would likely be a requirement, and so it would demand complex temporary bypasses limited by the spatial constraints out there, as well as the horizontal curves that feed into there. So the temporary, like WashDOT terminology, is maintenance of traffic on I-90 is likely expensive, and it's difficult for us to estimate because it's relatively unprecedented for us. All the 405 projects are on, design builds, but you see them there. It's also the furthest option from Sound Transit's representative project. Again, any extension eastward would likely mean additional funding from Sound Transit, who already faces budget constraints. This alternative sits the greatest distance from the center of the designated growth center and reducing the potential to capture the pedestrians and non-motorized users.
So I have a question about the pros in this one.
Yeah.
Moves vehicles well. Can you give me kind of an order of magnitude, a ratio between the alternative 2 and the alternative 3? If alternative 3 moves 100 vehicles well, is there kind of a reduction down to 65 vehicles well in the second option, or is it more just a speed measure, I guess?
Yeah, I'll give you a high-level answer. It moves slightly more vehicles in the modeling, but it's not a huge noticeable difference, whether they're crossings, at 12th or 11th or, couple hundred feet this way or that way. It's not a huge deal. But this one did score the best in the congestion relief category.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right, and so throughout the process, the team's been reviewing each alternative and giving them a score on established project goals and evaluation criteria. The 11th to 11th crossing consistently outperforms or at least closely matches all the other options in every criterion. Notably, it's the easiest and most cost-effective to construct and deliver. It offers the most green space and climate resilience. It has the fewest critical area impacts, fewest business impacts. It offers direct alignment, which helps with non-motorist connectivity, increasing the likelihood that the pedestrian and cyclist will choose it. That is why it is the staff's recommended option. To help visualize the crossing, the consultant has prepared some renderings and a short video. The first image shows the raised Gilman profile looking northwest. I'm happy to field any questions about these as we go through them, but I'll just let them linger for a few seconds and then move to the next one. You both probably have seen these before. Here's the second one, zooms into the intersection of the elevated Gilman and 11th. See the new Costco buildings in the background and the bypass lane in view. Towards the bottom of the screen. Here we're showing underneath the crossing, utilizing that space as an option for the city for bike parking or any other utility. And the final rendering in the presentation offers a bird's eye perspective from the north of the freeway looking south over Pickering and near where 11th Ave Northwest ends in the parking lot. This may be new, been updated, but I didn't get it embedded. This is just a short video of the rendering as well. And the updates the staff added was just labels to help if this should get shared with the public. On the project website, we'll add the labels too. That's it.
So I found out that clicking on that repeatedly did not do anything, so. You finally give up, but that was neat, thanks.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if video would work on a PowerPoint, but I'm glad it did. All right, based on the study's finding, the administration recommends seeking full city council endorsement of the 11th Ave to 11th Ave Northwest crossing, starting with presenting the recommendation at the Committee of the Whole meeting later this month, followed by a formal adoption in November. Council endorsement will allow the administration to close out the consultant contract and set a clear project direction and position the project for funding opportunities as they arise.
And if I may interject at this point, thank you. I know that Greg is presenting that we would come from the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee to the Committee of the Whole. I'm wondering if the committee would consider going straight to a regular council meeting for council to discuss the project, allow public comment, but also potentially ask for adoption or acceptance of this preferred concept. It's rare for us to take an item to multiple committees of the council, noting that Committee of the Whole is a council committee, and the council regular meeting would still allow for the whole council to get a presentation, ask questions and discuss. And potentially if council as a whole at that regular meeting were uncomfortable or had additional information that they wanted, we could still go postpone the item, have no action, and come back to another council meeting for additional discussion if that was the direction of council. So it still allows for plenty of discussion, but it would avoid going to multiple committees for council and, potentially streamline the process.
I think that'd be fine. How do you feel about that?
Yes, I agree, and as you say, Andrea, that would also allow the public to give us input as well. Yeah, I am actually surprised we don't have a lot more interest in this topic. This is a significant decision that we're being asked to make, and I have just been surprised that we don't have anybody joining us for these meetings, but possibly if we put it on a full council meeting, then it will get the publicity it needs. So, yeah, I agree.
Do you have any questions at this point?
I don't, and yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, and the video is really cool. I would recommend that we forward this to the council and put it on a future council agenda.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. What kind of feedback did you get at the farmer's market? What kind of conversations did you have? Would be the first question.
Sure. Well, I was trying to tally up every time somebody stopped in and asked about the project. I sometimes get kind of overwhelmed by how many people. It was kind of the opposite, where there was a lot of interest of it at the farmer's market, but I had just less than 100 tally marks, so didn't quite make it. But there it's very short, quick conversations. It generally starts with helping everybody kind of figure out where we're talking about, when we're doing it. I didn't get any sort of pushback, and we shared the recommended alternative. Well, everybody seemed to think it made sense. They're also at the farmer's market, and I'm sure it would be convenient for them to get to and from that as well. So.
Of course, yeah.
Very, very favorable feedback for the location and the project as a whole.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
On your findings, evaluation findings page, under the Supports Climate Action Plan tab, of course, the 11th overcrossing scored the highest there, but I was curious about all expand green space and tree canopy. That seemed a little bit counterintuitive to me. If we're doing a project that is cement and girders over a freeway, how it expands green space and tree canopy. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So if you look at this rendering, for example, what today is kind of a segmented two-way left turn lane will become continuous green space on Gilman. But it's not a huge impact either way in terms of a lot more green space or a lot less. And then if you think of the Pickering side, that's all asphalt today. At least you get some green space and vegetation as well.
So it's a net gain over what we have, but we're not talking about building a new rainforest along I-90.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Do you have any other questions before we go to audience comments? Okay. I will open it up for audience comments on this topic. Is anyone in the room that would like to make comment? I don't see anybody. Madam Clerk, is there anyone online that might want to make comment on this particular issue?
Yes, there is somebody with their hand up.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Connie, I've made you a panelist again. Are you able to unmute?
Aha! That's sort of easier. This is not functional. Okay, I am here. I think you can hear me. Not if you can hear me.
We hear you, Connie, go ahead.
Okay, good. I do have my camera on, but I don't see a picture. When he says everybody was for it, I think this is crazy. One, the cost, totally untenable. I think it's fantasy. The impacts to Gilman and the commercial area with creating a slip lane to serve one of our major commercial corridors is an economic impact that cannot be denied. You are creating a very tall, structure that is blockading your main commercial district for sort of an undescribed distance, because you have this arch that is going to create the elevation gain that you need to get over I-90. You do have to recall that there is water that runs across the north side of I-90. We also, in theory, are supposed to have a pedestrian bike path along that area with limited and under the freeway style connections to this overpass. So, I don't agree with any of it, except to accept the report so you can close the contract. I would disagree with the adoption of any preferred alternative and just accept the study. Now, that said, I believe my comments at the meeting was, this will never happen, this is crazy making, this is too expensive, there's nobody to pay for it, and you are entirely unlikely to get grant funding to support what is going to be, $125 million project. So, the emperor has no clothes again, and when you look at all of the money that we need to spend on all of the different things in our city, I really resist doing things that are just fantasy. Now, you all are used to hearing me all the time, but what you cannot say about me is that I have not been watching this for years and I do not pay attention, and that I do not have a sense of reality of what can actually happen in this town. And in this situation, we are better off changing our EIS and figuring out how to make a less car-centric town. As I recall in the EIS, I don't even think that the EIS required auto. I think that they just required passage. I would have to check that, but maybe what we need is pedestrian and bike crossings or something of that sort to go along with sound transit. So while we did the study because everybody seemed to want to do it, I say the emperor has no clothes. Accept it, move on, and try to think about the world differently, because we don't need more cars. We do need a way to make people be able to cross I-90 without single occupancy vehicles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie, for your comments. Okay. You were in favor of passing it on to the regular council, as suggested by the administration. I also am in favor of doing that and look forward to a robust conversation about the discussion tonight and the issues that have been brought up in public comment and in other emails and input that we might receive from the public. So you have what you need. Okay, thank you so much for the presentation tonight. Look forward to hearing additional information at the council meeting when the administration puts it on the agenda. Thank you. All right. we are to the announcements section. Do you have any announcements? Okay, that's great. I do not have any announcements that are related to the city either. And that being the case, we will adjourn this meeting at 8:58 p.m. Everyone have a good night.